Good afternoon, everyone. The joint meeting of the Education Finance and the Education Innovation and Policy Committees will come to order. It's great to see everyone. We are in an unusual place for either of our committee meetings, but this had space to allot for all of the members around the table. So that's our choice today, and we're very pleased to have the Commissioner of Education, Brenda Cassellius, with us today. She'll be our witness, and we'll talk about some very important things. Every Student Succeeds Act, World's Best Workforce, and do some other things. But I thought for her benefit and for the benefit of the fact that a few members are on both the Policy and Finance committees, but for the most part, you either serve on one or the other, that maybe we should go around the table and introduce ourselves. So I'll start. I'm Representative Jennifer Loon from Eden Prairie, and very pleased to be chairing the Education Finance Committee, and pleased that you're all here for this joint hearing.
Representative Sandra Erickson. I chair the Education Innovation Policy Committee, and I live near Princeton, Minnesota.
And, yeah, staff will go ahead and introduce themselves too.
Okay. My name is Andrew Hassick. I'm the Committee Administrator for the Education Innovation Policy Committee in the House.
Amy Roberts. I'm the GOP researcher for both the Policy and the Finance Committees for Education.
My name is Emily Adrians, and I'm the Fiscal Analyst for the House K-12 Committee.
I'm Christina Pera. I'm the House Research Policy Analyst for the Education area.
I'm Tim Strom with House Research in the Education area.
Hi, I'm Representative Rena Moran, District 65A, St. Paul.
Well, I'm Lori Pryor, representative from 48A, which is Minnetonka and Eden Prairie.
Good afternoon, Representative Jim Davney from South Minneapolis.
Carlos Barriari, also from St. Paul.
Representative Fu Lee from North Minneapolis.
Mars Beltrandi Uradquist, the DFL caucus researcher.
Representative Paul Marquardt, representing District 4B, all parts of Clay, Norman, and Becker counties.
Roz Peterson, representative from the Burnsville-Lakeville area, 56B.
My name is Representative Tama Tice. I represent 14A, which is the west and south part of St. Cloud, Wade Park, and St. Augustine.
Representative Peggy Scott, Andover, Northern Coon Rapids, and Ramsey.
Representative Matt Grossel, District 2A, Clearwater County, Beltrami County, Lake of the Woods County, and part of Hubbard.
Dario Tomo, Edina, 49A, the Education Finance Committee.
Dennis Smith, Maple Grove.
Bart Haley, 21A, Red Wing, Cannon Falls, Lake City.
Mary Kunish-Podine, 41B, St. Anthony Village, Columbia Heights, Hilltop, and the southern half of New Brighton.
Randy Jessup. Area is Shoreview, Townsview, and Arden Hills.
I am John Poston. I represent District 9A, which is in north central Minnesota, Cass County, Todd County, and Wadena County, and I'm on the Finance Committee.
Cal Barr, 31B, East Bethel, Ham Lake, Linwood, Columbus.
Representative Tony Jerkins from 54B, which is the Hastings, Cottage Grove area.
Drew from Savage, and I also represent part of Burnsville.
Is that Drew Christensen?
Yes.
Okay. Ron Cretia from 9B, Morrison County, parts of Todd County, Little Falls.
And Representative Cretia, I'm going to interrupt for just a second because I noticed I try to keep track of what's coming out of the departments and that, and there was an exciting announcement today about some grants on broadband, grants for schools and Wi-Fi for buses and for low-income students, and it looked very much like the proposal that you introduced and that we funded last year. Would you like to tell us just a little bit about that and how you think about that concept?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, thank you. Yeah, so we had come together on the broadband side as well as on the schools, and as you know, we were able to do the border-to-border broadband, which we did a priority of low income, and I see that, and we pushed that through. Actually had a little bit of resistance, but I'm very proud of that. And then we were also able to, you and I, we worked together, and we did a grant fund, $500 million, $500,000 for school districts to apply for broadband to put on their buses. And I will say I had some resistance from some people who said, why would you ever put internet on the buses? And I said, when you're in Roseville, Minnesota, and you have a 2-hour bus ride, or if you're, those of us who've coached, I know Representative Marquardt, you've been a wrestling coach, those kids spend an awful lot of time next to those buses, and with everything being data-driven today. So thank you, and very proud of all of our work on that.
I'm Doreen Kynes. I'm the Committee Legislative Assistant for Education Finance.
I'm Peggy Bennett from Albert Lee. I represent 27A, and I serve on both committees.
Hi, Harry Kennedy, Committee Administrator for the Education Finance Committee.
Representative David Bly, District 20B, represent Northern Rice County and Eastern LeSueur County. Policy.
And Representative Murphy and Representative Daniels, we do have 3 spots up here.
Representative Daniels, you're here, right here.
Can you stay there? Okay, go ahead. You want to introduce yourself, Representative Daniels? Right, or Representative Murphy, if you would like to introduce yourself while Representative Daniels catches his breath.
All right. He was ahead of me. I'm Representative Mary Murphy, District 3B, and school districts 700, 704, 709, 381.
Representative Daniels, you good to go?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for being late. This is the third group member I have for meeting here, so my apologies. Representative Brian Daniels from District 24B. Represent the school districts in the Faribault, Medford, Allendale, Claremont, and Nearstrand. There's no school in Hope, but I still represent Hope. And it's a neat saying, I represent Hope. Been in the legislature just starting my second term, and first time on innovation education. And thank you, Chair Erickson, for thinking about me, and I appreciate that, and looking forward to what we can do for our children.
Good. Did we miss anyone who's come in? All right. I think we've got it. I think we've got most everybody. So with that, welcome, Commissioner Cassellius. We're very pleased to have you here. Unfortunately, it's my understanding that because the way the room was configured, you cannot actually see the marks up on the wall with your presentation. Sorry about that. But for members of the committee, if you look at one of the large screens on the wall, but you do have a paper copy in your packets of the commissioner's presentation. And with that, we're going to turn over to you. And she has asked, and I think it does make sense if we hold questions until after her entire presentation. So as something occurs to you, please jot it down. And that way she'll move rather quickly through the presentation, and we can allow more opportunity for Q&A and dialogue with the commissioner. She's generous. I think you're planning to spend virtually the whole time with us today. So we appreciate that. And with that, welcome. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brenda Cassellius, Commissioner of Education, here with Kadosh Rooney, who is our Director of Government Relations, who will be a good go-to for all of you, as well as myself. And I'll give you my phone number so that you have it in case you have things that you need to discuss with me or constituent concerns that you would like for us to help address at the agency. So also, Madam Chair Erickson, thank you for requesting this meeting and for asking it to be joint. As we're crowded around the table, it is always nice to have an opening meeting be joint in the fact that we get to see one another. Many of the items that are discussed are often items that are in both bills and have cross-pollination of ideas, and we can hear each other's ideas, and so it seems to be a good way to start as a joint committee and all together. So thank you for accommodating that request. Today,
and Commissioner, I might ask you if you could bend the microphone just a little closer to you.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing too. These new rooms, I bet they'll adjust them a little bit. Maybe I can squeeze a little closer. It doesn't come out further toward the face here, so I have to bend down like this. So hopefully you can hear me okay. Otherwise, I'd say get rid of the microphone. I'll just use my teacher voice. So just quickly, I'm so happy to see so many new members. Some of you may not know much about me personally. I've been in education about 27 years. I started out as a paraprofessional and was a teacher and a school leader and a district superintendent. I worked in Minneapolis Public Schools, St. Paul Public Schools, Burnsville Public Schools, and also worked in Memphis, Tennessee before becoming commissioner. I've been commissioner now 6 years, started on day one with Governor Dayton. It is an appointed position. And so 4 years left of his term, and I hope to be able to work with all of you in a very bipartisan way to get things done. And what I hope to be able to demonstrate in my testimony today is that over the past 6 years, we've been able to do some pretty great work together, even in times when we've seen some pretty significant deficits. And putting children and families first has always been one of the governor's top priorities. And so I hope that we'll be able to continue that legacy over the next couple of years. So I'm going to go ahead and get started in my formal presentations. I will be as brief and concise and thorough as possible. But as Chair Luke said, if you could write your questions down on the particular slide that you maybe have a question about, or just in general, I will be available afterward for all of your questions. And then if you think of something afterward, I will be available to be able to answer any questions that you have. And then if there are things that we don't have immediate answers to today, we will follow up with you and provide that as soon as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my presentation, even though I can't see it. I have it here in front of me. So when the governor took office, we put out a vision for education for the state of Minnesota and the governor's 7-point plan. There were key things within the 7-point plan that we wanted to do, and I wanted to cover that. Then I also want to talk just briefly about some of the accomplishments that we've been able to do together, the legislature and the governor, with broad bipartisan support and stakeholder engagement over the past 6 years. Then into the World's Best Workforce legislation that was passed in 13-14 by Representative Marquardt and all of you, and how that has really codified the strategic planning within our school districts around resources and achievement gaps in addressing inequities and disparities and opportunities at our schools. And then some of the work also around the Every Student Succeeds Act and federal work with our federal waiver, and now the reauthorization of the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act, known as the No Child Left Behind, and now the Every Student Succeeds Act. And then specifically, Chair Erickson has asked for some background and update on English language arts implementation. So I'll touch briefly on that. You may want to hold a hearing and have staff come and talk a little bit more in depth about that in the future, but I'll briefly talk about that. I will try not to use a lot of acronyms, but in education we use a lot of acronyms, so what we did was provide for you a little acronym dictionary. It's probably not fully exhaustive, but if you have this next to you, all of the new members who maybe haven't been doing education for a long time, maybe have teachers in the family and know that sometimes we talk about what we call education ease, you'll have that as a point of reference. But I will try really hard not to use a lot of acronyms as I go through my presentation. So the governor's 7-point plan focused on 7 key areas. The first was funding for the future. As you know, we were facing a $5 billion deficit when the governor took office. And so really fixing the structural problems with the per pupil formula became really urgent for school districts. And so funding education, the governor said no exceptions, no excuses. He will every year as governor fund and add more money to education on the per pupil. Better early childhood education, we've been able to make some advances in that, which I will detail in a few minutes. Raising the bar and closing the gap for all students. We know that Minnesota has a nagging achievement gap within our schools for our student groups that are non-white and non-affluent, and so we've been putting a sharp focus on that work. Reading well, great, had great bipartisan support, and I'll talk to that in just a moment. And then support excellent teaching and quality teaching within the field, better testing regimes within our schools and less testing, and then really working as a department to improve our services for school improvement to teachers and to the professionals within our school buildings, our school leaders, our school boards, and ensuring that our department was one that provided more strategic support to schools rather than just monitoring compliance and collecting of plans. So let me just highlight historically where we've been the past 6 years and where we hope to go in the future. In 2011-12, it was a full Republican legislature, House and Senate. We were able at that time within a $5 billion deficit to work in a bipartisan manner with all the legislature and the governor to pass the very first bill the governor signed with alternative certification. We're also able to increase the formula by 1% each year, instituted some small school revenue to provide some relief for small schools. We also were able to get a start with $4 million due to the governor's leadership and really demanding some start with early learning. That was an additional $4 million to get us started. And then Jen Olson and the governor, Senator Olson, worked quite closely together to do Read Well, Third Grade with help from Representative Erickson and Myra to be able to look at how we could impact third grade literacy. That involves some district literacy plans as well as Cenovate for kids' achievement around growth, third to fourth grade, as well as having students earn proficiency in third grade. We expanded some career technical education and PSEO opportunities for 10th graders. And then we took our first step on innovation zones, which I think will come back around this year. I know that the superintendent's groups are working on the School Boards Association on some strengthening of the innovation zone legislation. We passed teacher principal certification. We passed alternative certification, as I mentioned. And we had some significant federal work that we did, given our ability to sought out big grants with the federal government to include Race to the Top, which we were able to secure that we hadn't been able to secure in the past, as well as a charter replication grant for excellence, equality, and charter schools. We also were able to secure Promise Neighborhood grants for our Northside Achievement Zone in St. Paul Promise neighborhoods. They had a planning grant, they weren't fully funded. And then the Bush Foundation funding for our teacher evaluation system. As you know, we didn't fund as a state our teacher evaluation system, but our Bush Foundation stood up. We have an excellent teacher evaluation system that we did collaboratively with our teachers, and there was very little interest around that evaluation system because we involved teachers and listened to their voices the majority of the time. Then in 2013-14, as you know, the House and Senate flipped, and we had full Democratic control, and we were able to get some things accomplished as well during those 2 years of the biennium. Again, like the governor said, every year as governor, he will continue to do increases on the formula. So we saw increases on the formula, 1.5% and 2% over the biennium. Local operational revenue and local operating revenue, referendum revenue, in order to create greater access to equity and districts, 6 districts who had not been able to pass a referendum before, being able to close that disparity gap from 31% to date, where we sit at 18.5% disparity between our 5% of highest earning districts and our lowest 5% of districts. We were able to pay back the school shift, $2.8 billion, which was owed to schools. So we stopped the borrowing and were able to then begin to work on structural fixes to the school funding. We also were able to $1 million ask during this biennium to be able to decrease the cross-subsidy for special education and secure funding to be in that work of buying out cross-subsidy, which is the unfunded cost of special education. We did all-day kindergarten, which the governor was proud of, that he was able to accomplish with the legislature's help. That all-day kindergarten matters, especially for kids around equity of opportunity, and also in our rural districts for enrollment, so that some districts had all-day K and parents would send their kids over to the other district and they would get enrollment. So, you know, it was a really good equity piece as well. We increased funding for early childhood and also increased our early learning scholarships, which was $40 million. And so that was very exciting to be able to go from $4 million to $4 million after our Race to the Top grant to begin to look at how we can support our poorest kids and give them more opportunities for pre-K. We were able to restore the Achievement and Integration Program, which was sunsetted in 2011. And that was really important to creating new opportunities for children of color and children who seem to be stuck in the achievement gaps. Also, Standard High School Diploma for Adults. It was the first time we were able to start working with our adult basic education programs to be able to develop an adult basic ed diploma. Now we have had about 195 adults choose this option, and we are in about serving about 80% of the students in ABE programs with the adult diploma. We were able to do school lunch increases for the reduced price lunches so that they were able to get those free. We did school breakfast, and we increased the funding for the North Side Achievement Zones and St. Paul Promise neighborhoods so that they had more sustainable funding. And we were able to pass the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, which was extremely important for our children feeling safe and welcome in our schools. In 2013 as well, we were able to do some one-time money. We know that QComp funding goes out to districts. We ran out of that funding, and we were able to do some increases in that funding to be able to provide that opportunity to more districts around professional development for teachers, as well as to provide additional $10 million to districts that didn't have QComp so that they could do their teacher evaluation programs and be able to train peer reviewers. We passed World's Best Workforce, and we expanded our regional centers of excellence to support those schools that were struggling the most. That were known as our PAR schools, and we were able to see some really incredible results with the on-site support that we were able to provide to teachers with our regional center approach. And it was a approach for innovation in government with the Humphrey Institute as well as with the Harvard Research Center. We did some testing reform this year with some limits on testing as well as repealing of the grad requirement. And then we were able to do some additional federal and not state funding sources for programs and supports. So just last couple of years in the biennium, we had split ownership between Democratic control in the legislature. Governor was still the same, obviously. We were able to increase the general ed formula because of surpluses that we had continued to have, 2 and 2 on the formula. We had some equity revenue that we did within Greater Minnesota, $5 million, to continue to eat away at this disparity. We did some work on facilities and some long-term facilities maintenance, $32 million, which really helped our rural districts out. And then now we know that there's additional effort in the tax proposal to do some work on the bond as well as our debt service, which I think could be extremely helpful for some districts. We also were able to continue to invest and continue to grow early childhood opportunities with voluntary pre-kindergarten for $25 million to increase about 3,300 students. We know that there's unmet need there, that there are additional requests for pre-K in school-based pre-K, but we've taken a mixed delivery approach in the legislature over the past 6 years to include school readiness funding at $30 million, Head Start funding, to try to eat away a little bit at those waiting lists. That was additional $10 million. Additional early learning scholarships as well, $48 million. We invested in quality for parent aware administration at $5.5 million, and we invested in home visiting at $2 million. So we really have in the past taken a mixed delivery approach around the different pots and different choices parents have to support their students in terms of scholarship investment, doing school-based options for parents who'd like to choose school-based options, and then supporting the support systems around that with parent-aware visiting. We've again invested in raising the bar and closing the gap. And this is something I am really, really proud of that we've been able to do together around equity to increase additional funding for English language learners by increasing the number of years that school districts are eligible to serve those students and receive funding. And we initially went from 5 to 6 years and now from 6 to 7 years. So I don't know why that happened. We also were able to historic investments in American Indian education, $19 million. And so that was extremely satisfying and rewarding to be able to secure funding for American Indian students across the state. We knew that students who were in our 4 BIE schools, our Bureau of Indian Education schools, were not getting similar funding than all other students across Minnesota, about half of what an average Minnesotan student would get, and we fixed that through equalization aid for them. And it was one-time money, so I'm hoping that we will continue to look at funding those 4 schools, especially the Buck School, which we know also got a new school building after a really long fight, that they deserved a better building than a pole barn that was falling apart. So I'm glad that that got done. Again, investments in Northside Achievement Zone, full-service community schools and branching out with that, about wraparound services for our kids, and also GED funding for free for our GED test takers. We've had just enormous increases in the number of adults earning their GEDs, which has been great. And then we invested additional funding for positive behavior and intervention supports to bring down and address the disproportionality of suspensions within our schools and create positive school climates for all our students. We were also able, and it's a lot that we've been able to get done, but I want to make sure I mention these things. It's QComp funding, supporting staff, support staff funding. This is school counselors and social workers being able to do that. And then we were able to fund our intermediate schools for professional development. I know Representative Bloom, this is an area you've been very supportive in, and I know that they still have an unmet need and concerns. And I've been meeting with the intermediates around the issues that they have around a very vulnerable population. So I know that they'll be presenting to you during this session. I ask you to take those very seriously, that we're able to address some of our kids who are most vulnerable to ensure that they are safe and that the staff that work with them are safe as well, and that our intermediates have the kind of supports that they need in order to address those needs. Student teacher supports, special ed and para-licensing and teacher supply funding that was passed. We did some work around data disaggregation. I think this will come up this session as implementation difficulties that school districts are having with that law. So are there some solutions around that? And some different work we've been doing with concurrent enrollment. Is this better if I talk maybe like this? Can you hear me okay? If I push the microphone away? Okay. So then I just want to briefly talk about interagency work. And this is something that the governor has really, and especially the lieutenant governor, as we work through the World's Best Workforce goals, we know that there are in-school factors and there are out-of-school factors that impact achievement gaps. So we've been working very closely with the lieutenant governor to look at what are the different ways that we can address those out-of-school factors that impact children and families, and the in-school factors as well. So we've secured with DHS school-linked mental health grants, for example. We've done home visiting. We've worked with housing for rental assistance. We've worked with them on parent-aware and high-quality early learning systems. You sure you want me to talk in that? Help Me Grow. And we've worked with higher ed around SLEDs and our new statewide longitudinal education data systems, our early childhood data systems, our interagency council to end homelessness, our children's cabinet, and then the GED initiatives that we've worked with through with the Department of Economic and Development. So, I don't know, is everybody comfortable with this? Yeah, I know it's making me slightly uncomfortable to talk in it. So I'll just continue talking.
Yeah, Commissioner, I don't know if there's interference. Is it possible for you to slide your computer slightly away from the microphone?
I don't have my phone on, so.
I think we're trying to find out why this is happening, and I know it's. Oh.
Okay, we'll just continue to move along. Should I move down here maybe?
Sure.
Let's try that. It's gonna be right.
It always happened to me. It's the film strip one.
Now I'm too low. Hang on a second. I know.
So go ahead,
So I can provide
switch the chair.
I'm not sure this is better, but we'll get going. Is this the first time the hearing room's been used too?
Apparently.
Oh. we get to work through all of these little kinks, so that's okay. We're all friends. So I'm going to move on to the world's best workforce. And the rest of the presentation should be fair. There's just a lot of things that we were able to get done. The world's best work, I think I should just be.
Oh, they have to record it.
They have, yeah, unfortunately, Commissioner, we have to have it recorded, squeaks at all, so.
Okay. Well, maybe I can speak louder, and is it picking up on your recording? Because that seems to fix the problem with the mic, so I don't know who's doing the recording, if they can see if that's picking up my voice, if I speak loud enough. And somebody give me an affirmative from Senate.
Checking.
Yes, I think they're checking on that to make sure. All right, let's
go ahead.
We'll continue.
All right, keep your voice. Love it. So, Rosa's workforce goals were really a way to work with school districts around strategic planning, strategic resources, making sure that there was stakeholder engagement in the school community, as well as formal public hearings on their budgets. As you know, many school boards meet, and not everybody attends these meetings. And so this was a way to try to get broad stakeholder engagement in the overall strategic planning that districts do, and to kind of pull us all together as school districts and as a state around a common vision and common goals for what we want to see happen and milestones for students. For instance, every student being ready for kindergarten, all third graders proficient in reading, all achievement gaps being closed, students graduating from high school, career and college ready, and students graduating on time from high school. Those were the 5 key goals we asked school districts to a strategic plan around. They're not anything that they weren't already strategic planning around, but what they did was create a common sense of purpose for all of us working toward, and provide transparency around what money was being spent on, where, and then coordination between the different categorical aids that are provided to school districts to be more strategic and intentional about the work, so that we know where the dollars are getting to the kids that are most vulnerable students. And that's what our goal has been, to raise graduation rates by 90% and to close achievement gaps by 50% as by 2017, and raising graduation rates by 90%. The World's Best Workforce process included adopting comprehensive long-term strategic plans, publishing the annual report, holding the annual public meeting, and then developing a brief summary to be yearly turned into the commissioner. It did not require turning your plan into the commissioner, nor did it require the commissioner approval of the plan. This was done intentionally to provide local control to school districts around their goals and the means to which they wanted to meet those 5 key area goals. World's Best Workforce Review and timeline and expectations was November to have the regional data profiles posted to their websites and their plans, that they would have their summer reports due to the agency in December, that in January we do those summers and provide feedback to school districts, that we give a legislative report on January 25th. That's different than this one. And then in February, we'd have our reviews completed and districts receive the feedback in March that they'd have it for their next upcoming year budgeting and staffing and strategic planning decisions. So far, we have 305 districts who have turned in their plans. We have 30 that are not in. Of charters, we have 140 and 12 not yet turned in their world's best workforce plans. Again, the data profiles that we provided for districts the past 3 years have included data on third grade literacy, on their 8th grade math, both their growth scores, how they're closing their achievement gaps, their graduation rates, and this has all been disaggregated for them by student group. It's also been provided by region to our local regional cooperatives so that they can dig deeper in the data, find out where success was happening, and share these best practices with one another. The very first year of these data profiles, I personally went out and met with superintendents or my deputies, Steve Dibb and Stephanie Graff, our Chief Accountability Officer, to really share with them and work with them around how to use data to improve student achievement. We gave you the website where you can find these. They're all recorded, it's transparent, you have this information. There's a link so you can go in and look at your region, you can look at your district. We also have a Minnesota report card that we created when we did our No Child Left Behind waiver. And there are many key pieces of information here around demographics, staffing profiles, there's achievement information, there's federal accountability information, there's some information from the student safety questionnaire. And so I would encourage you to look at the Minnesota report card if you're interested in finding out information about your school districts. This is in your schools. You can also compare it to state or other like schools and see how they're achieving. And this has actually got us a bright spot mentioned with the data quality campaign about our cross-tabulation capacity within our report cards to be able to compare like schools and to be able to look at multiple things like free and reduced price lunch and special ed students at the same time. So I hope you will use the Minnesota report card. That we're glad to provide training or provide any other assistance to individual members or group members to help walk through that. Finally, you asked for an update on the Every Student Succeeds Act. This is the act that replaces the No Child Left Behind Act, which is known as the ESSA, which is the formal name of the Elementary Secondary Education Act. Those are all three of the same things. And it was passed in 1965, generally as a civil rights act, to be able to provide protections for protected students so that they have equal access and adequate funding and supports put in place so that they would achieve at high levels like affluent kids did. So this law was put in place in 1965. It's been reauthorized a number of times, and the Every Student Succeeds Act is its most recent authorization, and that was just done last year. We've been working on the implementation of, well, not the implementation, but the planning of the implementation. And with the change in the president-elect administration, they have pushed out the timeline for the Every Student Succeeds Act implementation to 18-19 school year, and then we're targeting to support 19-20 school year. It is a law that requires us to identify schools and their achievement, to report on achievement gaps between specific student groups. It also asks us to support those schools, to report out to the public and to parents annually, and then to identify the lowest 5% of schools on those accountability measures. It also requires that we adopt high academic standards and that we identify what is a highly effective teacher and, and provide protections and plans for disproportionate assignment of teachers, highly effective teachers to high minority and high poverty schools. And so we're making that work with some broad-based stakeholder groups. We've done focus groups, specific interested parties and stakeholders. We've gone out to communities to do that work. It's just been a lot over the past year, and we will continue to do work until we have to post for public comment sometime late July. In an interest to align both the world's best workforce and the federal system, we've been working on identifying what are the goals of the world's workforce, what are the goals of ESSA. We have a state accountability system within the world's best workforce that's not often known, which is if schools are not making progress toward their localized world's best workforce goals, that we are, the commissioner has the authority in which to set aside, not take away, but set aside 2% for additional school improvement work within the school district, and how will that intersect with the work of the Every Student Succeeds Act and their title funding that they get. So we're doing that work now, and we fully expect that we'll have that ready this fall. I do want to share with members that the Every Student Succeeds Act is about $230 million that comes to the state for title funding. There's, of course, additional funding for special ed that's not included in that $30 million and nutritional aids as well. But $230 million goes out to our title schools. Just as a reminder, our state investment is nearly $9 billion in our public schools. So when we talk about the federal accountability, it is important and it is specific for supporting as a civil rights act to supporting students who have been historically disenfranchised or unachieving in our overall public school system. The $9 billion should be used also for those similar purposes, but it is set aside for all students, and an equitable and excellent education is protected within our Minnesota State Constitution for a uniform system of public schools. So I will go ahead and update now on the Wilder report, and that's just brief. That the Wilder report was issued last year. It gave some information about ELA, English Language Arts implementation. And it was very surprising to me to find that there were 17% of all schools responding in 2015 and 16 reporting that they fully implemented the ELA standards. And when I saw this for the first time, it confirmed what I thought I had known, and what I was feeling when I went out and visited schools was that teachers didn't yet have all of the resources. We hadn't caught up from years of cuts with curriculum directors and special experts within certain areas of curriculum development to be able to fully implement the standards. And that we were seeing a disconnect between what was being actually taught in classrooms on a day-to-day basis and what we were actually assessing in our tests. And we've had the ELA standards now since 2010, and teachers now are just, in some districts, getting new curriculum. They're getting new professional development because of additional dollars in QComp and others, to be able to do this deep work, as well as some of the work that the agency has been doing to support standards implementation. But I just want to caution that I believe strongly that we've got to do more in the area of standards implementation if we believe in a standards-based education. That there are specific things kids need to know and be able to do, then teachers need to have the support to be able to do that. They need to have the materials, they need to have access to the internet, they need to have access to other experts through our regional centers, and just funding so that they can afford to have curriculum experts help them with this work ahead. So just where we headed, the governor will give the State of the State address, and then Just, I think, a day later, he will release his budget priorities for the year. I don't anticipate that they will look very different than what the work that we've been doing over the past 6 years. He's been very committed to the work of the 7-point plan, very committed to the things that he has said that have been priorities for him over the past few years. And so I look forward to working with all of you, and I'd be glad to entertain any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and we appreciate you very much, your forbearance with the microphone problems. I'm not sure if they've identified why it's happening, other than we're just going to assume it's the first time in a new room and you're still working out the bugs in the system. So with that, members, if you have questions, please just raise your hand, but I will call first on Representative Erickson for any questions she may have for the Commissioner. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for visiting with us again. I appreciate your frequent visits to my office with staff. I would like to turn to slide 8, the data disaggregation grant, and the fact that districts have contacted me with concern about disaggregation of data that now has occurred because of this. Could you comment on why are we concerned and how do we fix that problem? Because I'm a little concerned that there's been a deviation from what the law stated in the 2016 spending bill, the education article.
Commissioner Cassellius.
What I've heard from the field and from superintendents mostly, and then a few parents, is that it's become cumbersome and very difficult to process the data. It's also without resources in order to do it, and that there are numerous boxes to check for families, and that has been sometimes confusing for them. So it's been very challenging to implement that. I think there's been a few folks for privacy concerns. That's mostly what I've been hearing about it.
So, Madam Chair,
Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, to what extent then will districts use this disaggregated data in the future?
Commissioner. Well, I think the intent, Madam Chair, of the law was to just count more kids and to be more specific about types of supports that we have been providing. I think that there's been concern that maybe we have missed some kids within broader categories, for instance, Asian category, and or African American category that we may have lumped in too many different student groups within one category. Therefore, then we miss the uniqueness of one particular group. And I think that was a good intent to be able to try to be more precise about how we support students. I think that it's just been more difficult in trying to calculate and gather this information. Local school districts can still gather this information on their own, disaggregate it so that they can be more precise at their school level, classroom level, how they support their students. It's just at the state level and the collecting of this data and the entering of it and the counting of it becomes very difficult. When you have lists, for instance, like on a report card, if we were to report out this information for any one group with 1,000 groups, with 1,000 kids in any one group, I think we had something like 80 different categories, and so it makes for a pull-down menu. It just is very challenging that way. But I do understand the intent behind the law. I think that there just needs to be some additional work to be able to try to figure out how to work through some of that. And then because it's not funded, I think that became rather challenging for local school districts, especially smaller school districts.
Madam Chair.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, is it true that Caucasians have been divided now into ethnicities of Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish, etc., and that districts are going to have to report out those differences or that data? Because I'm not sure if that's how the law read, and I'm not sure what you used in figuring out the disaggregation of data when I reread the provision in the spending bill.
Commissioner Cassellius.
Madam Chair, I believe we worked with the state demographer to look at those student groups. We do have a number of students who are holding Norwegian or Finnish or Korean or any other category of student group, and so that's how we read the law. So it is true that there are any demographic group of which the demographer collects data is represented.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, we may have to revisit that, but I want to go on to under the interagency work on slide 9 and the ECLDS, which is the early childhood website now. Could you comment on what we're trying to accomplish in having that ability to look at data on that website?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, the early childhood learning data system is really similar to our statewide longitudinal data system. It's a way to collect data on types of early learning experiences that children have. It's a way for us to be able to look at achievement levels, kindergarten readiness, so that when we make new investments in early learning, we'd be able to more precisely know which policies we should support in order to be able to make those recommendations and those funding decisions in the future. And that's, I believe, why people would like to collect more data around early childhood longitudinal data system. I do believe that we've been requested to provide information about pre-K and have another hearing on pre-K, and I can certainly have my staff who works directly with this present more information to you about our early childhood longitudinal data system. It was part of our Race to the Top grant in order to collect this data and have this information about mostly kindergarten readiness is what.
So, Madam Chair.
Representative Erickson.
So what kind of dollars or what dollars did we receive from Race to the Top to create this and collect that data? Do you
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, it was a significant amount of our Race to the Top data. To look at that, I would have to get back to you with the exact number.
And one last question, Madam Chair, on this topic. So, Commissioner, will the districts that have their pre-K programs in place be able to learn something from this for their children, or is this more a statewide picture?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, I think that the early childhood longitudinal data system is for all children and all kindergarten readiness, but I definitely make sure that I come back to you with more information regarding the data system when we present on pre-K and early learning.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right, thank you. Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Cassellius, and good to see you, Mr. Uni. I have a line of questions along where Representative Erickson was going, so if this is more data that you can bring back, that's fine, but this may give you some framework for when you come back. So when we look at the longitudinal program that you've launched, and I look out there, one of the things that I'd like to know, and if you can't answer it now, bring it back to us, is, because I agree with you, what priorities and outcomes when we go to fund. And as I look at this, I don't see a good way now with the data, maybe it's early, but how we can actually look at which fund or which programs are working, which are not, and how we're going to make those data-driven decisions. You know, we have the Early Learning Scholarship Program, as well as, well, we just have lots of programs, Head Start and all those, so it'd be really good to know that. So if you can answer that now, that's great, but I understand I may just be opening the door for further conversation.
Representative Commissioner, I would love to come back and talk with you more about the efficacy of the programs and really the data system at another time. I did not come prepared to talk about technical information about that, so I'd like to come back to the committee for that.
Yes. we'll be having an upcoming hearing in early childhood, and so at that time. Okay. Representative Krishan?
Yep, just a couple more. So, and if they're redundant, just let me know and I can pass on it. So the $25 million that we have for voluntary preschool, which kids were being, do you know which kids were being served? Do we have specific data? Was it the most vulnerable? Was it those that might have a priority because of homelessness or foster care? Do we know that data? Because we track that on the scholarship side as well.
Commissioner?
Keisha, yes, we do know that. We know that the pre-K, the small program, $25 million of pre-K that went out based regionally. 10% went to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Public Schools, and we had 7% go to charter, and 43% went to the rural areas, and another 40%, I think, went to the inner ring suburbs. I'd have to look at those numbers exactly, but there was a distribution that was put regionally because of statute. And then from there, we picked our kids in the highest concentrations of poverty, those schools that had the highest poverty. And then there was also a regional component on who had a child care center near them. And so that was also in statute. So we were able to then look at all of that and get the funding out the door. I was really proud of my staff and able to, turn that around so quickly, and school districts to be able to put together applications and to get those approved and out the door so that we could offer that program to them right away in the fall. So it's been extremely successful so far in terms of the execution of getting started. Of course, we'll have to look long term to see how they're doing in preschool programs and whether the delivery method really matters or not. And hopefully some of this data collection will really help us. I think the kindergarten entry profile, the KEP, which is something that we've sought funding for before, is something that will really help us when we had a more streamlined kind of assessment of that earliest learning and readiness for kindergarteners.
Representative Krisha?
Follow up. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the answer, Commissioner Cassellius. Did we also track the diversity of the teachers? I know Mr. and I had worked on an amendment last year that we were asked for on the scholarship side of how we would track the diversity of teachers, matching those with the students. Was that also done in the voluntary preschool, or is that in place now?
Commissioner Cassellius.
Madam Chair, Representative Krisha, diversity of teacher meaning racial diversity of
Yes.
teachers. As you know, Minnesota has about 4.5% of its teachers teachers of color. And I mean, a year ago, I was looking at the numbers of something like 560 African-American teachers in the entire state. And if it was going to match the demographic, it was something like 3,500 teachers we would need. So Minnesota has a significant problem with teacher diversity. And I think there are a number of reasons for this, and I would love to explore this topic with all of you to be able to put in place. We did some teacher supply work. There is the collaborative urban educators programs that we've been able to support over the past decades, really, but it just hasn't been enough to change that fact. And so I think that there's some low-hanging fruit, I think, to encourage young people and young people of color to want to become teachers. But then I think there's also long-term structural fixes that we need to make in order to begin to look at how we encourage people into the field of teaching and then encourage teachers of color into the field. Just honestly, some of that's around salary and having such a low unemployment rate in Minnesota and the economic outlook for people of color to get jobs. You may choose a career that you make more money in because there's just the availability of that now with the job market the way that it is. And so we have to be competitive. And I think we're at a point with teacher supply where we really are at a position where the state should step in to doing some creative ways, because I believe that we are going to have a number of teachers retiring over the next several years, and we've got to somehow figure out how we're going to educate the 90% of students who still choose our public schools. It's absolutely essential that we have excellent public school teachers and that they are diverse students who they serve.
Representative Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that's a no. You didn't track the diversity, match it up with the scholarships.
For preschool, we could, I think we might be able to get you that information. I know that we have a STAR report that tells us, well, at least for school districts, we're able to do that. We have a STAR report that tells us the number of teachers that they have. So I could certainly swing back around with the licensing division and see where we have assigned teachers and where there are teachers of color in those positions.
Thank you.
Representative Creasy.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And my big point of this is, I just want to make sure we're applying the same standard. If we're applying the standard and we're making the assumption that diversity matters on the scholarship side, we should also be doing that on the voluntary preschool side, which, you know, just to say that it's a public institution, we should not remove what we consider to be valuable. One more quick question. You have, I see in the data that you're collecting, it comes from the Department of Education, Department of Human Services, Department of Health, comes through a linking and de-identification. Is it also flowing back? So in other words, when we look at our earliest learners, are we going to be able to know who's on the MFIB, the SNAP, who's gone through the child protection system, so that we can really hone in on those kids, or is it just going to be on free and reduced rates?
Commissioner Cassellius.
There are data sharing agreements that we have not been able to secure with other agencies in terms of privacy for children. So I would need to get back to you to tell you what specifically we absolutely are able to collect and what we yet don't have for data sharing among agencies. I'm not certain we're able to collect MPIP data or other types of personal data in our early childhood longitudinal data system. Here, but we can check. But there's been kind of this hesitation to collect too much information on little kids, so we don't have the capacity right now to have those agreements in place to collect a lot of the data. I know some counties, like we were out in, I believe it was South St. Paul, they're doing some really interesting work with their county around wraparound services for kids. And in some of our full service community schools, I think that they would like to be able to do more data sharing around those pieces to provide better systems. But I think it's been challenging to get that kind of data sharing going.
Last one.
Representative Creasy.
Last one. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just know that I believe a 2-year-old who's in a vulnerable situation doesn't care about his data or her data. So you have an ally with that if you're looking for someone to help you move data sharing agreements forward. The last one that I have, I know you're looking at kindergarten assessments and kindergarten readiness. How are you going to do that when using the early learning longitudinal system, you stop collecting that data, or we don't have that data since 2012 that says kids are ready for kindergarten? How are we assessing that?
Commissioner.
Well, we've been, Madam Chair, Representative Creasy, we have been doing the KEP in districts, so I don't know how many I have. I'll have to get back to you with that. I just don't have that level of specificity for this presentation today, but I will cover that when we do pre-K, but there are districts using the KEP. They're using the 4 assessments that go into the overall KEP already. Most districts do some sort of assessments of kindergarten. What we're trying to secure with the KEP is that we're able to use the interoperability framework to kind of bring all of those 4 assessments up so that they read the same way. We have a statewide way of collecting that data and giving statewide information. So if one district's using the FAST or another one's using this work-ready one, then those will all bubble up so that it's understandable and comparable district to district to district. And so I'll provide that information to you when we do our preschool one.
And I'm sorry, can I follow up on that very quickly?
I've got a long list.
I know, I'm so sorry, but so are you telling me that's voluntarily? Yeah,
it's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory, so we don't really know. Because you said most, not all. And you don't have to answer it. I know there's a long list. I apologize.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative, we do not have mandatory use of the KEP
okay.
or any other assessment. But school districts are, I'm talking one assessment for the entire state. They use different assessments within the school district.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go away.
Representative Markwart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Commissioner Cassellius, I want to commend you and Governor Dayton for your work and commitment to education the last 6 years, because as you kind of went through the goals, that's right. There's been a formula increase every year. I think it's almost about 10%. And the governor has worked with Republican legislatures, Democratic legislatures, and mixed legislature. And what stayed the same has been his resolve to get results. And I think what we've seen is the legislature and the governor is to be commended for the work. And I think schools and more important students are better off today than they were 6 years ago when the governor took over. And, when you look at especially the governor's focus on all-day K and pre-K, I mean, there's probably been $250 million of investments if you take the early learning scholarships and the pre-K voluntary and so forth. And, when you look at all this data, and that's one thing that has changed since I first got here in 2001, is the emphasis on the data, which I think is good. But I think it's still going to be a number of years before we see the impact of these dollars that have been put into early ed. But I just think the governor has been a steady hand, and you have been a steady hand in making sure continually to move forward. And what I also like is it hasn't just been putting dollars in there. It has also been an emphasis on accountability, making sure that those dollars are getting results. And I know they're not getting necessarily the results you want or anyone wants quite yet, but we're moving in the right directions on things. And so one question I have is, I know with the ESSA, there's a part in there that it says that they have to go out to the state and identify schools every 3 years on the comprehensive reports and that. And you alluded a little bit to that, but will that match up pretty good with what we're doing with the world's best workforce? We're there. You're looking at schools every 3 years. If they don't make progress, will that mesh? And so are you going to be able to mesh those with the accountability of the world's best workforce with the ESSA?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Markwart, that would be ideal. So that's what we're trying to do and work with our stakeholder groups, is to figure out how we combine those two systems, because that's where you get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, and the biggest effort. So I think that it's really important because school districts get all of their money mostly from the state. Very little comes from federal government. As I said, it was a $230 million program, and we invest $9 billion yearly. So I think that it's important that we're not just looking at the No Child Left Behind Act or the Every Student Succeeds Act to be able to affect change for kids and for our most vulnerable kids, but that we're looking broadly at all of the dollars that come into the district to redirect back to our kids who are most vulnerable. And that, I think, is the spirit of the world's best workforce, is that you're not just looking at a federal program, Title I, just in only Title I schools, because we have about 50% of our schools that are Title I schools that have been held accountable before. Well, you have a huge achievement gap, and you're one of the worst in the nation. 50% of your schools don't get held accountable and are part of an accountability system. Well, then you can see why it's very challenging in order to move that needle. And so what we're trying to do with the Every Student Succeeds Act, and what we tried to do with the state funding pieces of World's Best Workforce, is to say all schools matter. All schools should be strategic planning. All schools should be aligning their resources to the kids that need them the most. That this is an urgent issue here in Minnesota for all of us. And so, especially with our shifting demographics, extremely important that we continue to look at how we're meeting the needs of all of our learners. So yes, this year was supposed to be the year that we intervened with school districts with World's Best Workforce, 2017, because of course we passed the law and they had 3 years in which to develop their plans and show progress. And so we're talking right now with the accountability groups, because we are implementing ESSA for another year. So what we have to think about, do we still continue in 2017 with the set aside for the school districts and develop that process, or do we take another year and then align it more wholly? And so we're discussing that now with our stakeholders.
Thank you.
Yeah. Further questions, Representative Markwart?
Oh.
Okay, thank you. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm new to this committee, and there's probably a good reason that I've avoided this committee for a long time. It's really complex, and I mean, I'm kind of just looking at the funds and the different things that the funds are going to, and I guess some of what Representative Markwart alluded to is what I was going to ask was just, when are we going to start seeing some feedback on the money that's been invested as far as the effectiveness of different programs. And I understand certainly the early childhood, it's going to be possibly a while before maybe when those kids reach third grade, that'll be probably the first kind of real assessment. But I also had some questions about that achievement gap, because I know when the waiver for No Child Left Behind was obtained in 2012, one of the goals at that time was to cut the achievement gap in half by 2017. I just wondered where we were at with that goal.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, welcome to the education side of things. It does seem to be a little complex and overwhelming at times, but we're here to help if you have specific questions. We do have the highest graduation rates we've had several decades, and so we're really thrilled about our graduation rates going on. We've also seen gap closure with our graduation rates. I didn't present on specific kind of state-of-the-state type of presentation today on our achievement. We've seen increases in our math and reading, but they've been much smaller and flatter than what we had hoped. And so I think that there's some urgency around that. And so our achievements has really stayed stable pretty much over these years. What was your second question?
Just where you were at in reaching that goal of cutting the achievement gap in half.
And so we saw the achievement gaps close for graduation. We've seen some good things there. But in terms of cutting gaps for our MCA reading or our Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, the state tests, we have not seen significant gap closure in those areas for any of our students, really. And so that's been very disappointing.
Representative Scott.
Some schools have made some progress. So individual schools, I was able to visit 44 reward schools, 4 bright 5-time reward schools, and it's been really exciting and informative to be able to visit those schools and see the great work that they're doing for kids in closing gaps.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope I remember my question now, because I haven't, and it's kind of escaping me. Well, I'll probably just have to, if there's time, I'll come back.
We'll come back.
I've lost my train of thought.
We'll come back to you.
Took my time.
Representative Mariani.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, welcome to our brand new hearing room. I think we're all adjusting to it. I want to piggyback a little bit off of Representative Marquardt's questions, and he actually asked most of what I wanted to cover with you. But I also want to provide a little context here. Is, sadly, I have to say, as one of the tenured members, it's a kinder way to say one of the older members of the body here. We went through, in my opinion, a pretty heavy period of time in which this department was, it hadn't sliding into pretty much a federal compliance watchdog entity. And of course, that came about as a result of the dominant shadow cast by the No Child Left Behind legislation, which, by the way, I was very supportive of and continue to praise the federal government's continuing with its civil rights historic mission of saying that all children, all students really ought to count. And they do count. And they count so much that we're going to actually count them. So I want to know specifically how you're doing with an American Indian student, or an African-American young man in third grade, et cetera. Members, that was a remarkable shift in American psychology and human and public policy to get that specific about going after important issues where people were simply just failing. And so that was an important shift. Nonetheless, and you know, we could spend hours talking about the many failings of the NCLB framework. It's often true of public policy where the details are going to hurt you more than the overall goal. But we went, in my opinion, through a period of time where this department was pretty much dependent on the federal framework for dictating what it needs to be doing on a daily and yearly basis. And one of the things that, and there was actually bipartisan agreement about this as we got deeper into the NCLB age, was an agreement to do whatever we can to move this department. You can't totally distance yourself from those compliance issues, right? But to move it toward being a helpful facilitative presence in our, I always forget how many hundreds of independent school districts we have, but to do that. And part of the vision that you brought to the department was a commitment to have it do precisely that. And so you among other things, created the regional centers of excellence, you know, to be able to work specifically with schools that needed that kind of assistance. And Representative Marquardt, when you were chair, you had both the incredible passion to addressing these opportunity gaps issues and also the intellect to put together a policy frame, which eventually became the world's best workforce, that provided the tool which the state of Minnesota, not the federal government, not another state, the state of Minnesota said, here are our standards. Obviously, they're going to be talked to the federal accountability system, but they are nonetheless our standards. So if NCLB or ESSA goes away, we have our standards. And what you were also doing was building an infrastructure by which this department can work hand in hand with school districts. Not the positional thing that NCLB was attempting to do, but working with school districts to provide real common practical advice and presence and walking with school districts. So I think it's important that we have that context in front of us because we have been moving, Madam Chair and members, and maturing, I think, as a state to really carry out this powerful framework. And I'm glad that we've been able to do it under both Republican and Democrat leadership in both of these bodies. I get maybe more frustrated than anyone else does around disparities present in the opportunity gap. My grandchildren and my children are brown and black and Indian and Asian kids, and they're part of a bigger community that are being left behind by our school systems. Even as there are incredible, wonderful stories within that as well. So I'm pretty impatient, but I also know we didn't get to this point overnight. And so part of what we have to be able to do as mature policymakers is to construct the powerful tools, the world's best workforce, the appropriate assessments, the intervention strategies, walking with people, not telling people what to do simply. And that, for better or worse, doesn't happen overnight. So I'll stop lecturing and get around to a broad question that.
We were waiting for a question in there, Representative Mariani.
It's here now, Madam Chair. Thank you. One, if you could say something very quickly about the EL component and the ESSA framework, because one of the things we also did as a state is we got out ahead of the federal government, lifting up English language learners as a critically important focus for our education system. The federal government sort of had done that over the decades, but now they've placed it more in the center. If you could say something quickly about that, and then if you could, and I don't want you to say what you want to save for later when the governor reveals his plan, but if you could tell us a little bit more about your vision with the regional centers of excellence and what role that concept, whatever form that could be, can play toward answering Representative Scott's question about how do we actually move quickly forward. Are we going to see these kind of proposals? Is it important to have that kind of presence with our schools, et cetera?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Mariani, that's a lot. But you pointed out really eloquently that, and it is on the 7-point plan that the Minnesota Department of Education, is 60% funded by federal funding and 40% funded by state funding. And we have about 430, give or take, here and there. And, it makes it really hard to do the work when you're doing federal compliance all the time. And when I came in as an educator and wanted to really support schools and not tell them what to do with the top down, but really to develop a system that I felt was respectful when I was a teacher, where people would come and actually work on site, work with me as a teacher. I'd work with other teachers who were having success in certain areas and curriculum specialists to help me do better by kids and to really take a focus on all kids and their learning needs. And I think that that's really important. I think we also touched on the really important work of in-school factors and what we can do, in fact, in school, but also the out-of-school interagency work that we've been able to accomplish as administration. It's so important because we know that out-of-school factors do also impact student achievement and can interrupt student achievement. So I just want to mention that. As for EL, the changes in ESSA, one, we're counting our students who have limited education, SLIFE kids, and we've had in Minnesota already, and we have the LEAPS Act, which was really nation-leading to be able to look at the ways that we integrate English language learners within our community. We passed the funding to provide services to English language learners longer if needed. Really also for them to be able to have supports, even if proficient, to be able to have supports to take advanced coursework and college and concurrent enrollment courses, advanced placement work, PSEO work, where we know that academic language has a different standard than what you might have on a minimal proficiency around the access test, for instance. So that was really critical, I believe, work to having opportunities for high-achieving EL students to be able to continue in their program. As for Every Student Succeeds Act specifically, there are 3 major changes in the law. One is that they took it out of a separate pot and that into title funding, so that it's a much more coordinated effort around how we service our EL students. Have to account for English language learner proficiency in our actual accountability system, which is really important. And then there is additional provisions around communicating with families and interpreting assessments and languages and that kind of thing. So there's additional work that we're doing with that. As for regional centers, that is something I'm extremely proud of. I think that will be a legacy lead that I will feel really proud of how we've accomplished to use federal money at first to support our lowest performing schools with a waiver, and how we hold schools accountable, and how we provide structured supports to those bottom 5% of schools, and for the first time ever, schools that have the highest achievement gaps, because that's what we had under our waiver, the 10% of schools with the highest achievement gaps, called our focus units, and work with them, and then we would increase some of that funding with a state appropriation to 3 other regional centers across. Mostly this work has been done in our communities who didn't have these really structured, formalized professional development and school improvement processes. Before the waiver happened, what schools would get a report, they do their compliance report and it would sit on a shelf. Now our focus is not about developing a plan, it's actually about implementing good practice alongside teachers and alongside school districts so that they get better results, and looking at the data, how do you monitor continuous improvement process. And so that's been really It, this workforce, I wrote down here something, I can't remember what you.
I think you covered it.
Did I? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, thank you. And we've got about a little over 15 minutes left and several people on the list, so I will.
I'll try to be brief too.
Well, I will ask members too to try to be succinct in asking your questions. And Representative Lee, I just want to make sure, did you want to ask a question or did you have me? No, okay, we've covered it. All right, thank you. Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So since the 2012 Child Left Behind waiver, test scores have mostly flatlined, as you've mentioned, and you also discussed the Wilder survey. And the information I have is about 19% of our elementary schools and 9% of our high schools have fully implemented the state standards. And, you know, I guess, do you see a correlation between these two? So what do you think we should do differently? And I don't think it's just curriculum. We talked about budget cuts and things like that. And I was just on school board, 2 years ago, and we always did care about curriculum and making sure that we were trying to comply with the standards. So this statistic shocked me. But we have seen a general trend across the state with those flatline test scores, which I know we're all a little frustrated with. So just wanted to hear your ideas on that. Thank you.
Commissioner.
And also thank you for all the information that you provided. We've done a lot of stuff here at the legislature, so thank you for that.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, there is a lot of accomplishments to be proud of, and I think, like Representative Mariani and Representative Marquardt have shared, I think it will take us some time to see some of these things actually come to fruition. You just can't shift a whole state in a matter of 6 years when we were really digging out of a big hole and cuts. I don't mean that to blame anybody. It's just the reality. I remember being an assistant principal, cutting everything at the high school level, and it became really, really challenging for us to focus because we were focused on cutting and raising class sizes, and teachers were in crisis, so it was just really hard. We ranked last for counselors, and we know how important counselors and social workers and nurses are in our schools, and we don't have them any longer in to meet the need. So I think that those things have impacted that, but I do think that we also have had such shifting standards. For many years, when No Child Left Behind was first happening, first we had the MBSTs that came, which was the Minnesota Basic Standards Test, and we had some basic standards, and 8th graders took the test. Then we said that that's not good enough, that 8th graders are taking these kind of low standards, and we're feeling good about our proficiency. So then we moved to a Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments, and we had Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments 1, and then we had Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments 2, and then we have now Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments 3. When I talk with groups about this, I say, well, we had this low bar, about 2 feet that anybody could jump over, and then we had about a 4-foot bar, and then we had about a 6-foot bar, and now we have about a 10-foot bar, and it just it's very complex to explain how standards work, how they're set, how the cut scores are set, meaning how many you need to get right, or which questions you need to get right in order to be considered proficient or partially proficient, and what that means. And so that can be quite complex in explaining why students are achieving on these tests the way they are, and how that happens. It's not just hard for the public, it's also hard for teachers when it's continually changing on them. And so what we tried to do as a legislature and body, and Representative Erickson's been very good about this, is try not to change the standards over and over again. Now we will revise our standards every 10 years so that teachers can master the students that actually come to them in the classroom, rather than continuing to try to master new content at their grade levels, shifting all of that. And I think it does matter in terms of our outcomes, and what's matched with what's taught and what's tested. And I think that recently we've developed what's called the Math Toolkit, and that has aligned our standards and the difficulty of the questions for teachers. And so some school districts have started to use this Math Toolkit, and it's helped them better. And and I'll just finally say, our regional centers of excellence, when we go into those lowest 5% of schools, hands down, those schools have a mismatch between what's being taught and what's being tested. And that's core to their work around that standards implementation. So additional funding for professional development, additional support for new curriculum. I've been in a district where they were using textbooks that were older textbooks and weren't our new standards. They've had to revise those now that they have new funding for that. So I think that all of that has contributed to kind of this missing.
Representative Peterson? Good, okay. Representative Jessup.
Thank you, Madam Chairs. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Madam Commissioner, my background is small business, so I am not in the education field. I do have the opportunity, though, to serve on the Education Innovation Committee. And this last week has been most educating. I think all of us in this room are discouraged by the achievement gap that we have as students, and we all want to see progress. The one data point that surprised me over this last week that I learned was that we only have 4% of our teachers as persons of color. I gotta tell you, that was a shock to see that. And I come from the business community. Businesses, small and large, diversity is very important, and it's promoted, and it's encouraged, and it's a way to draw additional employees. I think of the city of Minneapolis, St. Paul Police Workforce. I mean, every single institution out there, diversity is a big deal. It's a priority. And I look at the goal of the world's best workforce, and I applaud the efforts on that. I think that's right. Every business, every institution needs to have some goals. In retail, it's world-class customer service. And I gotta say, I came in a week ago saying to myself, you know what? We've got a world-class education workforce in our state. I can't say that. I can't say that any longer about our Minnesota education workforce. We are woefully lacking on our diversity. And all I can do is I would just ask for the record, what can we do to improve our diversity in our education workforce? Thank you.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Jessup, a great question. I'm glad to hear that you're passionate about this. I am as well. I think there are several barriers that we put in place for new teachers in general, and some specifically for teachers of color. Some of it is the overwhelming testing that teachers have to do after going through a program, a teacher preparation program. We ask our teachers to do content level testing, which they should be able to demonstrate mastery. Basic skills testing, which is a multiple tests within that one. We ask them to do pedagogy tests, which is about instruction. We ask them to do EdTPA and pay for their teacher prep program. All of this costs money. And you can imagine a college-strapped student just getting out of college, and you've got to pay all these fees to actually become a teacher. That can be quite challenging for some. The test, the actual test that they take costs money. The license costs money. And I think that that can be a barrier. I think also, I think salaries are a reason why we have challenges, because like a small business, you may be able to pay more than what a teacher would make in a school. So I think that that intervenes. I think that there's a competitive workplace market. And then I also believe that, you know, and I say this often, and I'm just being very honest with the committee, you know, I went into teaching 27 years ago because I am committed and passionate about children, and I wasn't looking at it as a job where I would make a lot of money. And it was a respected profession to go into. And there weren't a lot of people bashing teachers back then. And there's been a change in our rhetoric around the profession. And that's what young people tell me when I ask them, do you want to be a teacher? I don't think so. And I think generally it's because of the discourse around teachers. And I think we need to elevate the profession and hold them to account, absolutely, for results. But I think we need to pay them fairly and competitively with other with other work opportunities. And I think that as a public, we need to start respecting our teachers more for the work that they do. They work so hard. So those are my comments. Those are things I think we can do specifically to diversify. We can offer tuition reimbursement. We can pay these fees. We can offer incentive programs. We can up the Q program. We can work with teacher prep programs. We can create a teacher of color college here in the state of Minnesota. There's a lot of great ideas we can do, and I look forward to working with you on some of those in the future.
Representative Jessup? All right, thank you. Representative Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would like to also piggyback my question off Representative Erickson's questions earlier in the process around disaggregated data. And, you know, some of the complaints we've been getting from parents and others around the drop box of the whole disaggregated selection of allowing parents and others to self-identify their ethnicity. And, you know, like anything, all things new, when it's not 4 categories and now there's many different categories, it can be a little bit more cumbersome. And so it's something that people have to adjust to, for one. So in saying that, when I think about why this language was a part of the educational piece here and not in other systems, because we were looking at closing the achievement gaps, right, in my mind. It's about when we look at, for instance, or example, the African American community, and we're looking at African Americans or Somali or Oromo, we want to be able to clearly see where needs are and where kids are not succeeding, right? So we want to disaggregate that data. And so I become, and maybe this is not so, and so we can do some clarifying here too. So I become a little bit disenchanted when I hear that when we look at the Caucasian, and we see that has been broken down, I hear, by maybe 40 different categories. And in my mind, and what I am historically have known that Caucasian has been Caucasian, right? And we're trying to use examples of how communities of color are unperforming based on the dominant culture. And then here we are breaking down that ethnicity to really minute levels. And so I guess in trying to figure out why, and I did hear you say that, you know, the state demographer helped with that process. But in my mind, this was part about looking at how we can best close the achievement gap, right? So every child can succeed. And it has just expanded into a different arena. And I personally need to go back and look at the language and how that language was embedded in statute to see if we're collecting what we want to collect, and, you know, the data is telling the story that we want to be told. So in saying that, one question is, where can I find that list so I can also see where that data in that Dropbox is? Is that part of the data profile that you have here on page 8? And I guess, you know, how did you read that language so that we can do a better job legislatively if we need to refine it to do that?
Commissioner.
Chair, Representative Brand, we will be glad to provide you the list that's determined by the over 1,000. And so I would say that we are willing and open to work with you on revisions within that policy in order to better implement it. So I'm glad to, one, provide you the list, and then two, discuss any kind of improvements you'd like to make to that.
Okay. Can we
Because
find?
we do understand the intent and why the intent was and why you passed it. The federal government also did work and added some categories, multiracial. They disaggregated the Asian, Pacific Islander category. And so, there's this recognition that there are student groups within larger groups that we don't want to miss. So we definitely understand the spirit and intent of the law. It's just in the implementation of the law, there may be some things that we need to further look into in order to better implement and that would be meaningful to districts and to the public.
Representative Moran.
And Madam Chair, and the other question was, can I find that Dropbox under the data profile if I go to?
Madam Chair, Representative Moran, we will get you the data. It's not on our data profile or our student report card at this time.
Oh.
All right, thank you. And if you would provide that, we'll make sure that the committee as a whole gets copies of that. Thank you. I know we're right almost at 2:45, and I have a couple of quick questions for you, and then we'll try not to keep everyone too late. So, Commissioner, I wanted to touch on, you talked about the stakeholder groups and the work that was going on in ESSA, and you mentioned teacher or educator quality, and I think that is a key component. We know from lots of studies that next to parents, an effective teacher is critical to a child's learning and success. From that stakeholder group work, or just from your own thoughts, our teacher development and evaluation, our TD&E system has been operating now for about 3 going on 4 years. How do you think our system is, from the way it's set up, how well do you think it can help us measure teacher quality and effectiveness? And also, are there things that we should be doing to make sure that we're getting our most effective teachers to the classes of children who need them most? I mean, I know we have made some efforts and some changes in some of the legislation we've worked on together that is in law now, that a student is not to have a teacher rated ineffective 2 years in a row in classrooms and that, but what more do you think we might need to do to continue in the direction of teacher quality?
Well, Madam Chair, there's a lot that we have done around teacher quality together since 2011 with the implementation of school evaluation. It's just as important, but maybe doesn't get as much attention in terms of the direction of the school and the effectiveness of school leaders. You've developed professional learning around the standards, and we have worked with peer reviewers to train school districts. Each school district has their own teacher development evaluation plans. We've worked with streamlining our QComp programs and assistance around that, assistance in school districts with professional development. We have passed laws around assignment of teachers disproportionately. We also put in place a teacher equity plan for the assignment of teachers and identification for the federal government, as well as we've included in our World's Best Workforce summaries. So we have a section in our World's Best Workforce summary asking schools to look at their teacher assignment. Also part of World's Best Workforce is that teachers are trained in cultural competence. That is part of our our World's Best Workforce legislation. So I think that there's a number of things that we've done around teacher quality. As far as the Every Student Succeeds Act, it does require us to look at and define an effective teacher. It does not require teacher evaluation, but I haven't heard anybody talking about repealing or not doing teacher evaluation. I think teachers like to have ongoing feedback, professional feedback, and I think that teachers have worked with us to develop a system that works for them and works for schools. And then we have the right checks and balances placed in our teacher evaluation system that says if you have an underperforming teacher, that you would provide time for them to improve. But if they are not improving, that an administrator must issue some sort of discipline to that teacher. And so that is right in the teacher statute. And so that those are addressed, and that when they're on the school improvement committee, we went even further as a legislature to restrict the assignment of a student to a teacher on a performance evaluation improvement plan in more than 2 years. So this body has taken up the issue of assignment. It has taken up the issue of performance. And I think that the tools are there for administrators who are working with teachers currently to be able to do that. And so I think that we are sufficiently placed in terms of policy for school administrators to be able to remove teachers if they are ineffective. It's just, in my opinion, for the school principals and the school district leaders in order to follow those protocols within the statutes.
Okay. Thank you. And one last quick question. I know we're over time, but you mentioned also on the standards and sort of making sure that teachers are teaching to the standards. And as I understand, they are mandatory. It's not a voluntary thing to follow the standards or to be educating students to those. And I know not all districts are in QCOP. That is a limited program to the funds we have and that. And I do hope that there's something we can do to change that situation in this budget process. But aside from that, all districts do have 2% of their funds for staff development. Do we know, or is there information that comes from the districts on how they're using those funds? Do we know if they're prioritizing making sure that teachers are well versed on the standards and they're embedding that into the curriculum of their classrooms? Do we know if that professional development, staff development set-aside money is if that purpose is prioritized?
Madam Chair, I don't have that level of data on what's in every district-specific staff development plan, but we can certainly do a summary and try to better understand what school districts are doing around standards implementation. Survey or something like that to see where they're at. I know that there's been an uptake of that since we have been talking about most recently, but I don't have the data right here with me today to provide but I certainly would get that for you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, committee members, I'm sorry, we've gone a little bit over, and the time has really flown. We so appreciate you being with us, Commissioner, and you as well, Mr. Uni, and committee members for all your great questions. Thank you for persevering through some technical difficulties with the microphones. We look forward to having you back with us again. And with that, the joint committee is adjourned.